everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our fourth and final webinar of the Navigating the Hierarchy of Food Recovery series. Today, we will be focusing on things beyond the hierarchy, specifically policy and technology solutions to reducing food waste. This webinar is being put on by the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation in collaboration with REFED and the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. My name is Ashley Cabrera. I'm a Creative Services Coordinator for the Office of Policy and Sustainable Practices at TDEC. I will be hosting the webinar today for our wonderful speakers, and I will also be closing out the webinar and our webinar series. So just a few housekeeping things. Everyone is muted upon entry to reduce the amount of background noise, but if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to ask them in the chat below, and I will work on getting those answered. You can ask questions to everyone, to a particular speaker, or to me as the host, and we will get those answered throughout the webinar today. You can also raise your hand with the little hand emoji that's right there above the chat feature. And if I see that, I will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud instead of through the chat. So like I said, today we were going to be talking about policy, technology, and other innovative strategies for addressing food waste. And we are going to be closing out the series today talking about the state of food waste in Tennessee and also where we can go from here. Our presenters have a wealth of knowledge and experience that will help us better understand the challenges and solutions surrounding policy, technology, and just some really neat projects that they're going to be highlighting. So just to give some faces for our speakers, so we have Ariel from Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, and we have Angel from REFED, and then myself from TDEC. Before we get into the speakers, I just wanted to give a quick overview of Get Food Smart 10. I will be talking about this towards the end of our webinar today, but Get Food Smart 10 is Tennessee's statewide food waste reduction program. We do education and outreach, have a recognition program, technical assistance, and we also work in the space of policy, trying to address food waste through legislation, and also partnerships and granting programs. And it was formally launched in April of 2018. So with that being said, let me introduce our first speaker. We have Ariel Ardura. She is a clinical fellow at the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, where her work focuses on domestic food waste and recovery policy, as well as SNAP and other federal food access and nutrition programs. She works with clients and partners to advocate for strengthening food systems at all levels and translate research into comprehensive and compelling resources for policymakers. She received her JD in 2019 from the Georgetown University Law Center and holds a Bachelor of Urban and Environmental Planning from the University of Virginia. So without further ado, I'm going to give you speaker capabilities and take it away.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. As Ashley said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about opportunities to reduce food waste and increase food recovery through policy at the state and local levels. So just briefly a little bit about the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard, or FLPC for short. We operate like a small nonprofit policy institute in that we provide legal and policy advice to nonprofits and government agencies at all levels, as well as other organizations on a range of food policy questions. And then as a clinic at the law school, our role is also to teach students about these issues in the classroom. And we have them work on clinic projects to bring awareness to these issues and help to, develop solutions and provide resources to our clients. We work across several areas in the clinic. One is community food systems, and then we have food access and nutrition, and then sustainable food protections, and then probably our biggest and certainly our oldest area is our work on reducing food waste and increasing food recovery. These are just some projects we've worked on over the years. One thing I will be talking about a little later is our Keeping Food Out of the Landfill report, which is a toolkit for states and localities on what they can do to increase food recovery at those levels. So as you can see, the problem with food waste is global, but if you'll notice, North America is a little bit different from the rest of the world because it's actually the only region where waste is greater than loss. And so it's a huge problem in the US. About 62.5 million tons of food is wasted every year, which equates to $218 billion. You know, likely heard the statistic that about 40% of food produced in the U.S. is not eaten, and this equates to 21% of our water use, 4% of our oil use, 18% of our cropland, and it contributes 15% of the methane produced in the U.S. So it's a huge issue. And we see at the clinic addressing the issue of food waste as a triple bottom line opportunity. It has the opportunity to help people because by recovering just 30% of wasted food, we could feed all food insecure Americans. It has the opportunity to help the planet because just a 20% reduction could save 1.6 trillion gallons of water and avoid 18 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. And then finally, there's potential to make a profit here. A 20% reduction in food waste could generate 15,000 new jobs and 1.9 billion in annual business profit. And you know, for these reasons, there's growing attention on food waste from all sectors, business, consumer, media, and certainly from policymakers. So law impacts food waste in a few key ways. One is that food is heavily regulated. You know, the production of food, the transportation of food, distribution and sale of food is all heavily regulated. There are laws around food safety and misbranding and adulteration, trade, environment, and things like that. And the law can act as a disincentive, either because of confusion over the laws or because of the law actually serving as a barrier. But then policies can also provide incentives or drive changes in habits. And so I'm going to be talking about some of those opportunities today. And this is just a quick slide to show you sort of how we do policy development at FLPC. So we receive hundreds of emails and phone calls every year to help answer legal questions by donor businesses, food banks, or other food rescue organizations, as well as policymakers asking for advice to help make it easier to donate. And we also try to help coordinate and drive policy conversations about how to reduce food waste. And we learn about these issues from our work with client organizations or for government agencies. And so that's sort of our path to policy development. This is the cover of our Keeping Food Out of the Landfill toolkit. We published this back in 2016, and the reason this toolkit came about is because, well, you know, one, we think that food waste is a problem with solutions, and that there are opportunities at the national, state, and local levels, and that states and localities are well positioned to identify ways to reduce food waste. And so we wanted to kind of help lay out, you know, some of those opportunities to do that. So if you haven't seen it yet, a lot of what I'm talking about today comes out of this toolkit, and I certainly recommend, checking that out. So these are the different policy areas that we cover in the toolkit, and today I'm just going to focus on 5 of these. I'll be talking about liability protection for food donations, tax incentives for food donation, state labeling, food waste reduction in K through 12 schools, and then organic waste bans and recycling laws. So I'll start with liability protection, and I want to start with the protections that exist at the federal level, because I think that will help set the scene for what can be done at the state level. So at the federal level, we have what's called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, which protects donors, nonprofits, volunteers, and gleaners from civil and criminal liability unless they act with gross negligence or intentional misconduct. And in order for these protections to apply, the food has to be donated to a nonprofit in good faith. The food has to meet all federal, state, and local quality and labeling requirements or be reconditioned to meet them. The donated food has to be distributed by the nonprofit to needy individuals. Needy individuals is not defined in the law, nor are many of these terms actually. And then finally, the needy individuals receiving the food must not pay for it, so it has to be given to them for free. And then states also all have protections, some of which go above the federal protections. We have a number of recommendations for what can be done to expand liability protections at the state level. One is to provide liability protection for food donation to certain direct donations. And so this would cover donations of food made by certain food businesses to those in need. So instead of having to pass through a nonprofit, it could just go directly to the people that need it. And this is, something we recommend because there are a lot of food businesses out there, like restaurants, who it's just too much hassle or costs too much to donate the food to a nonprofit, but they could easily donate it to people who need it, and they have the food safety training to be able to do that. The other sort of big business that we have in mind for this sort of protection would be farms who are donating low-risk products. And so there are 9 states that provide liability protection currently for direct donations, and I believe Tennessee recently became one of those. Another big recommendation for expanding liability protections at the state level is to extend liability protection to donations of food that is then sold at a very low price to the ultimate consumer. So allowing nonprofit organizations to retain this protection if they sell products at this low price that would just be enough to cover the cost of handling, administering, and distributing food can support different models of food donation and offset some of the increased costs of that food recovery organizations experience. Nonprofit organizations that sell foods at a reduced price can fill a need for food insecure individuals who, for different reasons might not be willing or able to obtain all of their food from the food they need from a food pantry or soup kitchen. So there are things, like social supermarkets or nonprofit grocery stores that sell donated and recovered food at a very low price. And they've had a lot of success with providing another alternative to rescue food and support those in need of food access. And so extending liability protections to those sorts of efforts could really help. And there are 18 states that provide protection for low-cost sales of donated food. Okay, next I want to talk about tax incentives for food donation. So at the federal level, there are a few tax incentives available One is the general federal tax deduction for donated goods, and the other, there's actually an enhanced deduction for food donation, which is almost 2 times as much of the value as the general deduction. And it's had a positive impact. When the enhanced deduction expanded in 2005, donation increased by 137% the next year. And there are 12 states that have state tax incentives for food donation. And one of our recommendations for state tax incentives is to create a credit instead of a tax deduction. So unlike a tax credit, the value of a deduction is contingent on the amount of taxable income that a business has. And so a deduction is typically a less effective incentive for businesses that operate with a low profit margin. And so we recommend, where possible, to create credits instead of deductions. Another recommendation is to place only reasonable limits on the amount a business can claim per year. So one way that states limit the size of their tax incentives is by setting a percentage of the value of the donated food that can be claimed. Another way that they might do this is by setting different size caps on the total dollar amount that can be claimed by a business in a year. And there's no clear recommendation for an appropriate tax credit or deduction size. It'll definitely vary from state to state. And data on the impact of tax credits in the existing states currently is pretty limited. But generally for food waste reduction purposes, the larger the benefit, the better. And one big positive of tax incentives for food donation is that they take, while they take money out of the state revenue, they do offer a return on investment in terms of the health and nutrition and environment of the state. And then another one I want to highlight is offering additional credits or incentives for transportation and processing of donated food. We know that one of the biggest costs of donating food is the transportation of the food to a food recovery organization, and so offsetting some of those costs would be a big help in terms of incentivizing food donation. And ideally, such an incentive would be able to be claimed by logistics and trucking companies that transport food to nonprofits, donors transporting the food themselves, or donors who pay food recovery organizations to come pick up the food from the donor. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about date labeling. So date labels at all levels are generally suggestions of peak quality of food and not an indication of the food's safety past that date. Nevertheless, most consumers think that dates are safety related. There's no federal definition or requirement for expiration dates. The FDA only requires date labels on infant formula, and as of May 2019, FDA recommends best if used by to be used as a quality label when there are no food safety concerns. And then USDA also has recommended using the term best if used by since 2016 for a quality label. Many states regulate date labels and past date sales, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. So we did a lot of research into this back in 2013, which was well before my time with the clinic, but came up with some interesting findings on the issues with the date labeling system as it exists. The research found that 84% of consumers at least occasionally discard food close to or past the date on its package, and that 41 states require date labels on some products and 20 states at the time, at least, restricted sales or donation of food past the date label. One good thing that's been happening is that there is an industry voluntary date label standard, and it was started by FMI and GMA, and what it does is set two terms as sort of the two labels to be used. So the term best if used by would be used for foods where there's no food safety concern, it's just an indicator of peak quality of the food, and then used by is the term that would be used when there is a food safety concern and that the food should be discarded. But the issues with this, it's not sufficient because it's not universal. Some may still use labels incorrectly, and then also because in over half the states, state laws prevent compliance with this standard. And so it's not enough to kind of get us to where we need to be. And so at the state level, we have a number of recommendations. One is to eliminate confusion by standardizing date labels. And that would, ideally what we'd see here would be the two different labels, and they would be optional, but if a label was used, it should be one of the following: best if used by to indicate quality, or used by to indicate a food safety concern and that the food should be discarded. Some other recommendations are to change any laws that eliminate, or change laws to eliminate bans on selling or donating past date foods as long as there is no food safety concern past that date, to extend liability protections for past date food donations so long as there's no food safety concern, and then finally to support date label education so that consumers understand what these date labels mean and can make informed decisions. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about food waste reduction in K through 12 schools now. So, why is it important? Nearly 25% of all elementary school lunches are thrown in the trash each year, and reducing school food waste will ultimately save schools money. Reducing waste also has important educational benefits for children, and it helps to train students to see food as a resource rather than something that should simply be or can simply be discarded. And also some school food waste occurs due to a misunderstanding of the regulations in place surrounding school meals. And so just a little bit on how states regulate school food. States enforce compliance with food safety regulations. The state agency can conduct food inspections, and then local departments of health can enforce those regulations. Schools also have to follow a food safety program if they are part of the National School Lunch Program. And then finally, states can have their own nutrition requirements above the federal rules. So some of our recommendations to reduce food waste in schools, one is to increase lunch and breakfast meal times to allow students more time to eat, and put lunch after recess. Studies have shown that students with less time to eat are likely to waste more food, and also, when lunch is before recess, they're just not as hungry. We also recommend encouraging students to only take the food they know they will eat. One way that potentially could help with this is to consider banning trays. Schools could also implement offer versus serve, and this would allow students participating in the federal school lunch program or breakfast program to decline up to 2 types of food that they know they will not eat. Offer versus serve is currently mandatory in high schools, but optional in lower levels. And so if this were made mandatory in elementary schools and middle schools, that could really help. And then finally, conduct food waste audits to track how much food is being wasted. A few recommendations on recovering food in schools. One is to create share tables to allow food that goes uneaten by one student to be eaten by another student. So long as it's, in its original wrapper or peel, it's okay to put on the table. And then once it's there, another student can take the food for free, or the school can resell or donate the food. Schools or, school districts can also create guidance documents on share tables. States can also do that. And then finally, schools can donate food to food banks or to local food pantries, instead of delivering the food to organizations outside the school, it might be more convenient for schools to open a portion of their buildings after school hours to operate periodic food pantries at the school itself. And then finally, recommendations on recycling food waste in schools. States and localities can encourage composting programs. Composting can be on or off site. States can also provide guidance documents and provide funding to schools that would like to build a composting program. Cities and school districts can partner with companies and farmers for off-site composting. That's something we've seen in South Carolina. And then I know I'm running low on time, so I'm just going to really quickly go through organic waste bans and waste recycling laws. So over 97% of food waste ends up in landfills. And when it's in landfills, it produces large amounts of methane and 135 million tons of greenhouse gases each year. And just to give you a quick overview, I'm going to go just through recommendations or existing laws and then recommendations. So 5 states and DC have implemented state-level waste bans or organics recycling laws. Organic waste bans ban the waste from going to landfills, and whatever the regulated entity determines some sort of alternative action, whether that is donation or sending food to be composted or to an anaerobic digester. And then there are organics recycling laws, which require entities to take specific actions with their waste, like composting or sending to an anaerobic digester. But each of these prohibit certain entities that generate specified amounts of food waste from sending waste to landfills. And so our recommendations are to phase out exemptions based on distance from a processing facility, phase in additional categories of waste generators, eliminate exemptions based on the cost of composting, incorporate language encouraging diversion through methods other than composting, provide guidance and education to covered generators so they understand, the laws that they need to comply with and what they have to do. And then finally, utilize financial incentives to divert waste. So that is all I have for today. I know that was a lot, but I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. I don't see any questions that have come in the chat yet, unless you have any on your end. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. If you're more comfortable. Someone said quick question. 1 second. Let me unmute someone. Okay. How do states without income taxes structure tax credits?
Sorry, can you, how do states without income taxes structure tax credits?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. That is something I look into, honestly. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I'm happy to look into that and follow up with you all, and so I can send that out to everyone.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was thinking that, I'm like, that may be more of a longer phone call or another webinar in itself for that one.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated.
Okay, awesome. We have one more. Someone's wondering if you could pull up the pathway of food policy slide again.
Oh,
Do you remember which one that was?
Oh, there it was. This one?
Yes, I believe that's the one. Let's see. I don't see, let's see, there's a question. I think they just wanted to see that again. I'll also be sending out these slides just in case someone was trying to get more information from it. Let's see. Someone did put in the chat that they're happy to share their child's elementary school that has a share table for unwanted milk, juice, and other unopened foods as an example. That would be really great. Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, Ariel. That was wonderful, and it was a lot, but just a lot of great content, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. So next up, we have Angel Vesta, and she is currently the Senior Manager of Capital Innovation and Engagement at ReFed. She originally worked in the education field teaching underserved communities after working with students for 7 years. She received her grade diploma at the French Culinary Institute and worked through New York City's top restaurants, including Morimoto and 2 Michelin-starred Atera, and with food service companies like Compass Group. During that time, she witnessed the significant amount of food being wasted in the hospitality industry and decided to work with the food waste team at World Wildlife Fund. As an extension of that, she worked in supply chain and led strategic sourcing and procurement with a focus on food waste reduction at Manhattan Restaurant, part of Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group in New York City. Okay, without further ado, you have presenter capabilities. Oh, and you are still muted.
Oh, all right.
There we go. I think you muted yourself again. Try again, Angel. You're still muted. There we go.
Is that good now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, in this virtual world, I'll also turn on my video. Hi, guys. So, Ashley, thanks for having me, and Ariel, thanks for kicking us off. Really excited to be here with you guys today. So, as Ashley mentioned, my name is Angel Vesta, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Capital Innovation and Engagement Team at ReFed. And for those of you who are not familiar with ReFed, we're a nonprofit that's solely dedicated to advanced solutions to prevent food waste in the United States, with the goal of cutting food waste by 50% by 2030. And the foundation of our work is really centered on data and insights. And we gather data and provide actionable insights into the current state of food waste and opportunities to directly address it across the supply chain. And to drive action, we work directly with 3 different stakeholder groups. The first is with food waste solution providers. We help them scale their solutions and grow impact. The second is capital providers, and we advise them on where their money can be most catalytic in reducing food waste. And lastly, we also work with food businesses to help them advance their food waste reduction efforts in their operations by adopting effective solutions. And because we get to work with these stakeholders, we're very fortunate and uniquely positioned to also drive action by facilitating convenings and partnerships across these different groups. One thing that we have done recently is launch, and data is really at the center of our work, and the Insights Engine was developed as a data and solutions hub for food loss and waste, and it's designed to help people take meaningful action. And it has 4 distinct tools. The first is our food waste monitor, where you can see how much food is being wasted in the United States and understand why it's happening and where it's going. And as Ariel mentioned, you know, there's a lot of tangential benefits to reducing food waste in terms of the financial benefit and combating climate change, and this tool can really help illustrate those benefits at a very quantitative level. The second tool is our solutions database. So we identified over 40 solutions that, if adopted, could help us cut that food waste by 50% by 2030. And related to that, we also have a solution provider directory featuring over 700 solution providers that offer services across the food recovery hierarchy. And last but not least, we have an impact calculator for people and businesses to understand the full impact they have when they prevent food from being wasted. So this tool, it actually allows you to assess metrics like the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that are avoided and the meals recovered when you reduce food waste. And so actually, you know what, I'm going to send through the chat the link to the Insights Engine just so you guys can have that. But in addition to the Insights Engine, we also developed a blueprint for action and identified 7 key action areas for stakeholders to focus on across the supply chain over the next 10 years to prevent food from being wasted. And within each of these areas, there's 3 different types of solutions. Modeled solutions, for which we have a good amount of data on, unmodeled solutions, which we still are trying to get more data and grow those solutions, and then lastly, best practices. And what we've found through our Insights Engine is that more than 50% of the produce that's left behind on farms in 2019 was actually still edible. And produce that's left on farms is actually where a lot of the food waste is occurring after the residential sector. So consistently, the residential sector is still the largest source of food waste overall, and because of that, that actually has an even bigger carbon footprint. What we've learned, though, is that prevention solutions can impact both of these areas and really directly address on-farm food loss and food waste in homes. And so I'll start off by talking about these food waste prevention solutions and technologies, but I should preface this by saying that, you know, some of these solutions you'll hear, you might seem like that's not really novel or innovative, but what I'll try to highlight for you is that solution providers and new players in the space are going about these solutions in very creative and innovative ways to scale impact. And again, a lot of the solutions I'll feature are not exhaustive of what's out there, so definitely check out our solution provider directory where you can see more of the plethora of solutions. But I'll dive in, and the first main solution I'll talk about is imperfect and surplus produce channels. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of food waste happening on farms and a lot happening in homes. And what's nice about this specific solution is that it can help get that food off of farms and put it through different sales channels and get it directly to businesses and consumers. And we're seeing, especially now with COVID, that there's 3 main channels right now that can be very effective. The first is B2B online marketplace, a B2C online marketplace, and then upcycling food products. And now with COVID, and we're in this more virtual world now, online marketplaces are gaining a ton of momentum because people are doing a lot of their shopping online instead of going directly to grocery retailers. And then also, COVID highlighted the inefficiencies across our supply chain. And for better or for worse, that built consumer awareness about food waste. And we're finding that this awareness has created a market demand for products that can prevent food waste across the supply chain. So that's why upcycled products are very intriguing to consumers now. And so I'll tell you a few examples, but we'll kick off with Forager. So this is a startup of a B2B online marketplace solution, and they're a tech company that's aimed at increasing the amount of local food available. And they offer a gleaner tested technology that can simplify and speed up purchases of large volumes of fresh food from farms. And because Forager is designed to drive a more local food economy, it has the potential to help build a more resilient food system in times of crisis like the pandemic. Another online platform I'll talk about is Misfits Market. So it's a B2C imperfect and surplus produce channel, and they sell imperfect produce directly to consumers. And this type of model is interesting because not only does it help prevent food from going to waste on farms, but again, it continues to increase that consumer awareness and build demand for these types of products. On a similar vein, we're seeing that meal kits have a ton of potential. They have the opportunity to source surplus and imperfect produce directly from their farmers that they partner with, and they're already designed to prevent food waste from going to waste in homes, because in that kit, you're getting the appropriate amount of ingredients, and they're managing portion sizes. And as I mentioned earlier, food that's wasted in homes has a larger carbon footprint. So when meal kit companies pre-prepare the meat or the produce that the consumer gets in that meal kit box, all of those trimmings and byproducts from that prep is now in a centralized location, which makes it easier to manage versus it being in individuals' homes. And so companies that have the infrastructure and capacity can manage all of that byproduct and trimmings to make sure it's not going directly to landfill. And again, I'll just mention that I've seen meal kits specifically has gained a lot of demand during COVID and has the potential to continue seeing an increased demand over the next 4 years. The last solution I'll talk about in the prevention category is upcycled food products. So Scraps is an example of a company that takes imperfect and underused vegetables to make frozen pizzas. And this is like a win-win-win because on so many levels, it's helping prevent food waste on farms. Oftentimes, upcycled products are shelf-stable or frozen like this, which increases the shelf life and helps prevent it from going to waste at the home level. And then, of course, there's a lot more flexibility when it comes to marketing the product. Now, companies have the option to tell a story about how their food prevented food from going to waste or not, because quite frankly, depending on who exactly the company's target market is, it almost could be to their advantage not to message that their product is made from otherwise wasted food, but at the same time, it's still doing that. And so there is a bit of an advantage there in terms of how they market these products. Now, with all of these things, there are challenges to scaling these solutions. I will call out specifically the economics for farmers is still very unclear because cosmetically imperfect produce could potentially cannibalize sales for their more traditionally perfect products, which can be difficult in managing operations and supply and demand. And then even though a lot of these solutions are gaining momentum, at the end of the day, consumer education is still needed to scale any solution. And currently, specifically pricing of products like upcycled CPG products have not been very cost competitive yet. But there are opportunities to really overcome these challenges, and I'll call out two in particular, the first being catalytic capital. Catalytic capital can help de-risk innovations, close funding gaps, and build infrastructure and capacity, and we're seeing more and more funders wanting to give that catalytic impact so that these solutions can scale. And then additionally, we're seeing organizations start to emerge like the Upcycled Food Association, and that can really help address that consumer education piece. So as an example, the Upcycled Food Association recently launched a certification that helps consumers easily identify which products contribute to food waste reduction. So it's nice, simple messaging. So we've talked a lot about prevention solutions and their potential impact. And I'd like to switch gears for a moment and talk about some of the emerging technologies and innovations that are helping to scale food rescue and donations. And I'll first start with the technology piece. And sorry, Ashley, I'm having trouble now going to the next slide.
Yeah,
but I can keep going.
Just a minute.
And while we're figuring that out, I'll just quickly mention, so technology can really help measure and track food donations, which is beneficial to help donors realize potential tax incentives. And so one company that I'll mention is Food Donation Connection, which is actually headquartered in Tennessee. And they've really been a leader in this regard. They actually leverage a customer relationship management platform, which has become the foundation of their operations, and that tracks critical metrics to help their food donors. On the flip side, though, there's new players coming to the forefront that really focus on developing technology that can help the end recipient. So, you know, FDCs really focus on how they can better serve their food donors, but we want to also make sure that the experience for those that are getting emergency and supplemental food are having a dignified experience. So one company that's recently started is called Plentiful, and they've developed an application that's very much like Open Table in the food donation space. And so what it is, it's a free, easy-to-use reservation system that individuals can use on their phones. And it's been very much needed because what we hear from food pantries is that oftentimes there's a huge line of individuals starting to form at their door as early as 4 or 5 in the morning seeking emergency food. And so they wait in these long lines, but with an app like Plentiful, they can actually reserve a time where they can come and pick up their food. So it avoids having them wait in those long lines. It helps the food pantry really manage their inventory, and you're also helping to ensure that everyone's getting the food that they need. I will say, though, while those are great technologies, the reality is, though, that technology is not a silver bullet. It is a value add, but only when the design is intentional and thoughtful. You know, you don't want to just create new technology for the sake of it. And so what organizations are finding is that technology has been most beneficial when it's flexible, drives efficiency, takes into account the end user, and is designed with the outcomes in mind and gathers data. So that's when technology can really improve an organization's operations and capabilities. So that's the technology piece. The other piece of the puzzle that I want to mention in terms of food rescue and food donation is earned revenue models. Now, typically, food recovery organizations are nonprofits, which means that they heavily rely on philanthropic funding. And as a result, senior leadership often spends the majority of their time fundraising instead of on strategic planning and growth. But nowadays, food recovery organizations are building their financial health and sustainability through a mix of earned revenue and philanthropic funding, and they're developing new business models. And so Ariel, I believe, mentioned earlier Daily Table, and they're one of my favorites to highlight because they're a food recovery organization that uses a grocery retail model, and it really puts the power in the hands of the end recipients. And individuals have the dignity of buying very affordable, high-quality, donated food and have the opportunity to make purchasing decisions based on their own preferences. And what's great about this model is not only does it benefit the end user, but what ends up happening is Daily Table's reliance on philanthropic funding decreased significantly, and they're able to cover their costs primarily through this earned revenue. And so it's very exciting to see food recovery organizations build that sustainability so that they can grow their impact. I'll pause for a second. Ashley, any luck on the slides?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, are you able to navigate now? I was going back through, and for some reason, 51 just isn't wanting. It's not wanting to pull that one up. So that was every time I go to 51, it fixes up for some reason. So I'm sorry about that.
It's
are
okay.
you able to navigate through?
I'm not. I'm stuck at this slide, but it's okay. We can keep going.
Okay, is it, if I push in the forward button, because it just moves, you're able to go back but not forward?
Exactly.
Okay, let me do one thing and see if it will. Okay, try it now.
No, you might need to maybe
that's fine.
down.
Yeah, just let me know when you need to go forward and I will move on.
Yeah, if you have presenter control and can move forward, that would be great. But I'll keep going. So those were a lot of the innovations and technology on that food donation side of things. But I'd also like to talk about new technologies and solutions that are coming out in terms of industrial use. And so we often talk about composting and animal feed, but we're seeing a lot of potential with industrial use solutions. And one solution that has been emerging is renewable hydrogen. It's gaining a ton of traction right now. One solution provider called Electroactive Technologies, which is a startup based in Tennessee, they take waste and convert it into green hydrogen. And what's unique about their solution is that they can take the waste and break it down using microbial electrolysis, which then produces renewable hydrogen that can power the growing fuel cell market. Very exciting, and we're hoping that it'll continue to scale and grow, but like with any brand new technology, we're still needing more infrastructure and market demand to see the full potential of this type of solution. But there are great startups like Electroactive Technologies that are really leading in that regard. The other exciting area in terms of just industrial use solutions is bioplastics. One solution provider, Mobius, also based in Tennessee, they take organic waste and lignin and they create valuable materials, specifically bioplastic. What's particularly interesting about their innovation is that they add fiber-based materials to control chemical properties, specifically nitrogen. The reason that's important is because nitrogen content is critical, because right now with common bioplastics that you see, if you were to take those bioplastics and put it into compost or soil, typically it will have challenges in degradation and deplete the nitrogen that's in the environment around the bioplastic. So what Mobius is trying to do is manage all of that, and what they're finding, at least in this early stage, is their bioplastics decompose as well in roughly 180 days if you put it into composting. Those are just two examples of industrial use solutions, but there are a number of other emerging solutions, specifically in sustainable cosmetics and sustainable apparel, where they're taking biomass and turning it into new products. So very exciting industry right now. I want to switch gears, though, and kind of tell you a bit more about what food businesses and capital providers are doing to really take innovation and implement it into their operations or to fund and grow it. So one example is the Wonderful Company. Now, the Wonderful Company, you may be familiar with them. They sell pistachios and the palm juice and have a number of other products. But they recently launched the Wonderful Innovation Challenge, and it was conceived as a tool to help spur innovation across their company because they have a lot of tough sustainability challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. And the challenge platform, it allows them to engage deeper with and learn from talented individuals that are out there in the space like Mobius, like Electroactive Technologies, and build strategic and effective business relationships that can benefit everyone. And so for the first iteration of the challenge, they launched what they're calling Palm Payday. And it's as I mentioned, it's the first iteration, and they're focusing on a specific problem that they're facing at Palm Wonderful. So Palm Wonderful makes those palm juices, and as a byproduct of the juicing process, they produce roughly 50,000 tons of pomegranate husks that consist of dewatered husks, seeds, and pith, but the pomace is actually full of nutrients, it has an 80% moisture content, and it's packed with antioxidants. And historically, the pumice has just been sold as cattle feed, but they believe that there are solutions out there that can really maximize the value of the pomegranate husk, and that's where this challenge comes in. And so they've been able to kind of look at solutions from over 400 solution providers over the globe. They're in the middle of interview stage right now, and finalists will be invited to a pitch event next week. So it's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing which innovators really fit with their operations and can help benefit the society that they work in, as well as the economy. The other organization I'll mention is specifically a foundation, and it's the Kroger Co. Zero Hunger, Zero Waste Foundation. And so back in about, I think it was 2018 or 2019, they launched an innovation fund. And the idea was to, again, find those emerging innovative solutions that could prevent and rescue food that would otherwise be wasted in the communities that Kroger serves. And they had a successful launch a couple of years ago, and now they've actually reopened applications with a new focus. And the focus is really on how to elevate food to its highest use and disrupt that linear supply chain that we currently have. And kind of like we discussed with the prevention solutions, they're really focused on upcycling imperfect produce lines and meal kits, because there is that opportunity to, again, maximize the full value of food and help fix the inefficiencies that are currently happening across our supply chain. So, like I said, the application just opened, so if you are a startup or know of any startups or solution providers, applications are open until April 1st. So I wanted to make that shout out for them. But ultimately, these are just a sample of solutions and what companies and funders are doing to take action. There are a ton of other solution providers across the food recovery hierarchy and that operate and serve in Tennessee. So like I said, I sent the link to the Insights engine. Take a look. You can see all the different solutions that we've identified, as well as explore the 700 plus solution providers that we're aware of. And if you know of others or are one yourself, we hope you'll join our solution provider directory. There's just a simple sign-up form. But with that, I would like to, again, thank Ashley and Ariel for letting me be on this webinar with them today, and would be happy to open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, and thanks for rolling with, technology being a pain. Let's see. There was, one question. Electroactive technologies was still at the lab scale and was having difficulty scaling up. Has this changed? You know about that?
Say that one more time, sorry.
You're fine. Electroactive technologies was still at the lab scale and was having difficulty scaling up. Has this changed?
I mean, they're still at a very early startup phase, but I do know that they're actively fundraising and looking for opportunities to grow. So I do think that they're seeing a little momentum on that front. The one thing that is interesting about them is that their technology in particular works well with biomass or waste that is heavy in terms of the liquid content, and so I know that's been a bit of a barrier to making their solution flexible and applicable for other food businesses and waste generators. But I do think that they're having a little momentum in terms of at least fundraising.
Great, and I don't see any more questions on my end. If you have any more questions for Angel, just put them in the chat. But if there are no, that thing just jumped right back to slide 50, if you saw that. This thing has a mind of its own right now. But yeah, thank you so much, Angel. Thank you for letting us know about all of those. I wanted to pull back up your slide that you had about all the great providers in Tennessee, and I actually did not know some of these were in Tennessee, so That is really great. I had no clue Appeal Sciences was out of Tennessee, but if anyone has, especially from Kroger bulk produce, and you see a little sticker that says, you know, that Appeal is on there, it's basically, and I'm going to try not to butcher it, but food grade sealing over the produce that helps. You're basically using food to keep food fresh. That's probably in a nutshell, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, that's close. Yeah, it's a shelf life extension technology that does use, food byproduct to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I went to an event that ReFed did. This was pre-pandemic, and got to meet the people that do that. So really, really cool stuff. I wish I came up with ideas like that. Maybe I'll try to find somewhere in my brain that's holding those great ideas and send it something to Kroger. But thank you again so much for that. And I'm going to finish us off and conclude this webinar and the webinar series with giving an overview of our Get Food Smart TN program and just the state of food waste in Tennessee and where we can go from here. So first of all, it's really important how we address food waste. We've been going through the EPA's food recovery hierarchy in this webinar series, but I also wanted to show you another version of the hierarchy that was developed by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Their hierarchy breaks down the steps a little bit more with different types of diversion through composting, including at home, small scale, medium, locally based, and then anaerobic digestion and mixed waste treatment. Then of course that food, it shows that food waste should be banned from the landfill. There are so many options to take before the landfill, and incorporating other options builds our local community. So the state of food waste in Tennessee. Organizations are focusing more on household food waste. An example I'd like to point out is Clean Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee. They have done a great job at focusing more on just the everyday consumer, and especially in Memphis, 40% of food in homes is wasted, and adds the most significant is the most significant contribution to their food waste stream. They started a awareness campaign called 901 Save the Food, and they have come up with a pledge and a website and a quiz that consumers can take, and they're just really focusing on the education to make a difference in the area where food is mostly wasted. Businesses are staying committed to their efforts despite tough circumstances through the pandemic. One example is Mitchell Deli in East Nashville in Middle Tennessee. They have done a wonderful job to use this time that has been slow for a lot of restaurants to really hone in on how can they, really make their efforts more streamlined and more effective. And they educate their customers all throughout the restaurant. There's even signage in the bathrooms and the bathroom stalls about food waste. And then, of course, at their disposal station, there's signs to guide the customers on whether to put it in the can that goes to landfill, if something is recyclable or compostable. And of course, they virtually have no food waste before the customer gets the food. Most of their food waste is after the customer has already purchased it. But they work with a local composting company, Compost Nashville, to pick that up. So as far as composting companies, there's 8 throughout the state who do residential and commercial pickup. The newest one is in Chattanooga, and that has really helped them reduce the amount that they're sending to the landfill. But a reminder that it's not the first step. Composting is great and it adds lots of nutrients to the soil, but there's all these other steps before you get to composting that you can take to reduce your waste. The problems that faced during the pandemic is also helping to strengthen processes for food donations. Food pantries and food banks are being stretched to capacity as the number of food insecure people has increased greatly. It's increased by 55% since the beginning of the pandemic. And 4 in 10 people visiting a food bank is doing it for the first time. This allows them to be more efficient, and especially with processes for transporting food donations from people that are donating it to the food banks and food pantries. That process has been improved so much because they've had larger amounts of food that have come in because the need was there and is still there. We also worked with the Tennessee legislators to expand food donor liability protections in Tennessee, so making it easier for food to be donated and for people to access that food also. The new law aligns state donor liability protections with the federal standard of gross negligence. It provides protection for the donation of past date foods that are still apparently wholesome, so as long as they are still good, even though they're past their due date, their expiration date, they can still be donated. And it provides liability protections to food businesses donating directly to a person. So previously, food had to be donated to a nonprofit, like a food bank, and then the food had to be distributed through them. But now this allows for person-to-person donation, which helps break down some boundaries that businesses and schools have dealt with for several years. Education is key. It's the first step to helping to change habit, and ReFed actually has great data on cost benefit of education in addressing food waste. And of course, funding is always needed, and it's especially needed to have a widespread impact. There's a lot of things that people would like to do, a lot of efforts people would like to start, but sometimes if the funding is not there, it brings a halt to that, and things are either put on hold or it has to go at a slower pace. So there's a statewide deficient in infrastructure. So a lot of the work you see are being done in urban areas, which is where the largest population across the state is, but there's all of these cities and areas throughout the state that either don't have resources pertaining to composting or even the amount of education that's needed to let people know how big of a problem food waste is. So, like I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, Get Food Smart TM was launched in April of 2018. There's 3 components to the program. There's education and outreach, recognition, and technical assistance. Outside of these functions, we also work in the food waste space as far as addressing food waste through legislation, through partnerships, and through granting programs. So for education and outreach, we do have our Get Food Smart TM website. On there, we have the information, the tips, the resources broken down by category or entity. So if you're just an everyday consumer looking for ways to reduce waste in your home, we have information for you on that. If you're a restaurant, we have specific information for you. For grocery stores, for schools, it's all broken down because everyone deals with food waste in a different way. And the way that a restaurant deals with food waste is not the same way that, a farmer or a grocery store deals with it. We have educational resources as well, and we really had the opportunity to develop even more during the pandemic because we weren't able to do in-person workshops and events. So we developed food waste posters. There's 6 of them, and they each have just a small blurb of how many resources are wasted through this amount of wasted food, or how many people are going food insecure in Tennessee, such things like that. We also have food waste info brochures by entity, so one specifically for schools, for restaurants, and so on and so forth. We have a meal planning notepad, so on that it gives some tips on what to do when you're making your list for the week to go to the grocery store. Gives you a place to plan out your meals, so what you'll have each day, and then an opportunity for you to make your list at home so that when you get to the store, you don't buy more than you need, or if, I'm sure this has happened to a lot of you, you get something and you realize, oh, I already had that at home, so now you have double of it. So this really helps, and we have printed versions, but you can also go on our website and download a PDF of that. We've made infographics on understanding source reduction, on understanding upcycled food, food date labels, understanding food donation, and then more recently about food donor liability protection, so what they are and how you're protected to donate food. This webinar series is a way that we've been able to educate despite not being able to go in person for COVID. And in 2020, we reached over 40,000 people through our education and outreach efforts. So these are just a few examples of some of the infographics that we've created. As you can see, there's understanding source reduction. We go through how much food is wasted, the benefits of source reduction, and then tips. And then we have understanding food date labels, which is really important because that contributes to food waste. Just because there's not standardized labeling, there's like 4 different ways that an expiration date can be put on an item. So we go through in that how to understand it and what each of the things mean: use by, sell by, best by, freeze by. And then understanding upcycled food, and it gives some examples of different restaurants that have used this method, for example, the Hummingbird Cracker Company uses raw pulp that's left over from juices to make these crackers. It's just amazing, the things that can be done. So our recognition program, we currently have 190 participants, including every Kroger store in Tennessee. Organizations must satisfy at least 5 of up to 30 criteria that we have in the application that they fill out. It's free to be a part of it. The categories are schools, restaurants, government entities, and nonprofit organizations, and then grocers, industry, and agriculture. And whenever someone becomes a part of our recognition program, we send them a welcome packet with different resources, including the food waste posters that we created, this certified logo so they can put on their business, and then they always have us to ask us questions. We provide free technical assistance, which I'll get to in a minute, and anything that they need. It's an open door. They can call, email anytime, and it's also a great way for us to promote what they're doing, and for others that may want to start doing food waste efforts, they can see what they're doing, and almost like a mentor-mentee system that can happen with the recognition program. So technical assistance offerings. Our technical assistance offerings are made to assist entities with reducing food waste and increasing food recovery and diversion. And it's open to anyone, whether you're part of the recognition program or not, and at any level. So you may just want to improve the efforts you currently have, or if you're starting from scratch, that's fine too. We offer educational workshops and roundtables, local planning support and stakeholder meetings, lunch and learns, help with food waste audit planning, food waste reduction strategy assistance, We can help developing a standard operating procedures and also on-site compost training. And you can find all of that on our website, and there's a short request form that you can fill out as well. So where do we go from here? We, as a program with Get Food Smart TN, we are planning a Food Waste Awareness Week. We're thinking early 2022. And we actually got this idea partly from Florida, who will be doing their Food Waste Awareness Week in April of 2021. And based on feedback from them and then planning from our stakeholders and partners, we'll be developing that and putting that together. We will continue our webinars and workshops, and hopefully soon we can get back to in-person workshops and continue our roadshow. Our roadshow, what we're calling it, nothing super official, just the way that we, when we first created the program, decided to go about doing our workshops, and our assistance is to go to different cities and help them with their food waste goals. So we've been to Memphis, to Chattanooga, and we have a few others in the works with Jackson and Knoxville. We thought it was really important to go about doing it that way, because trying to come up with a way for the whole state, the whole everyone doing the same thing just didn't make sense, because what Memphis is dealing with around food waste and food insecurity it looks different than what Chattanooga landscape looks like. Memphis has great composting infrastructure, and until recently, Chattanooga did not have that. So being able to meet them where they're at and what they currently have and where they currently stand is important. We're looking at possible funding opportunities, possibly smaller community grants to help out more widespread with projects. And there are a lot of policy opportunities surrounding date labels, animal feeding, food waste in schools, and several others that we'll be looking into. And then partnerships and collaboration, this is super important, and we plan to continue to partner with various organizations and governments across the state. And it's important for everyone to do this. Collaboration is key. You may have an idea and not sure where to go from there, or how to start it, but there may be someone down the road, or East Tennessee and you're in West Tennessee, that could help you, and people in your own community that you can partner with to make a difference. We also hope to expand our recognition program. Like I said, we have 190 participants right now. Our goal by the end of this year is 250 participants, and expanding that just helps to show other businesses, restaurants, schools, and citizens across the state what is being done and what can be done, and hopefully provoke some motivation and assistance through that as well. So thank you all again for joining us. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. It is ashley.cabrera2@tn.gov. And just a reminder that the recording of this webinar and the slides will be sent to everyone. I thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.